we're going to begin with a wild Africa Cup of Nations final, which took place in Rabat. Host Morocco were seeking to win their first Africa Cup of Nations title in 50 years, but they suffered a 1-0 extra time defeat to Senegal. All the craziness occurred in second half stoppage time. Senegal had a goal chalked off, and then Morocco was awarded a penalty. The Senegal coach was incensed with both calls, so he instructed his players to leave the field, which they did for almost 20 minutes, but then Sadio Mane compelled them to come back. When the penalty was finally taken, Brahim Diaz tried a panenka, which did not work. Edward Mendy with the save. We go to extra time. Pop Gay with a sensational strike. 1-0 Senegal. They held on from there. They win their second AFCON title in 5 years. But all the talk was about the craziness at the end of regulation. When the Senegal coach walked into the press room, he was jeered and stormed off. FIFA put out a statement. Gianni Infantino said it was a disgrace. There's talk of Senegal players being suspended for the World Cup. And Ian Dark said Senegal should have forfeited the match and Morocco should have been awarded the title. What say you?
Oh, my goodness. We're starting to show off with this because it has dominated the soccer news and, a bunch of different sides of the spectrum when it comes to reactions. As you mentioned, this is drama that overshadows what should be a celebration of Senegal once again being champions. And also, I think an examination of Morocco that we have talked so much about here on the pod and how good they are, men's, women's, all ages, hosting a World Cup coming up. For a lot of people, dark horse type of team when it comes to the World Cup. But this is a bad look. This is ultimately, I think, a bad look for, the players involved in terms of leaving the field, the team involved in terms of both teams involved in the World Cup this summer, but certainly Senegal leaving the field, the Confederation as a whole when it comes to CAF, and for a tournament that like any tournament needs as much positive reaction as possible. Again, this is what people are talking about. They're not talking about Gay's wonderful goal, right? They're not talking about the fact that if you really look at it, Senegal was probably a better team than Morocco and certainly deserved it. But they're talking about all the things outside of it. And, unfortunately, over the years, there is a perception at times that, that CAF and the teams, and certainly the times it's been a reality, with some of the dysfunction that we have seen, and it's not limited to African teams, but there has been dysfunction and this perception that it's unorganized and unserious and chaotic. I mean, this did nothing to dispel that perception, and so I think it sucks for an entity that is trying to put its best foot forward. Now, I can also talk about it in terms of the content that it generates and the drama that it generates. And, someone asked me today over there on the X machine, what would happen if this had happened at a World Cup? Well, first off, I'm not sure that Senegal in a 26th World Cup would have done what they did. And look, we talk about CONCACAF after dark and the shithousery that occurs and all that kind of stuff. So every confederation runs its show in a certain way. And there are certain things that you do within your confederation that you might not do outside of your confederation. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. It's just kind of a regional pride, but also kind of a regional behavior. And what is normal or accepted behavior in your region might be different than when you're at ultimately a World Cup. So those are a lot of things that are percolating in my mind when I think about this. There's some other stuff too, especially as it relates to what happened on the field, especially when it comes to Panenka. But those are my initial thoughts. Mosse, your thoughts here, because I do think that if this had happened at a World Cup, I'm not sure they would have been as accommodating. I think that Senegal would probably have had to forfeit the game, and that in and of itself would be dramatic and a pain, but I'm not sure that FIFA would have had the patience that was exhibited there.
Yeah, it's a shame because the incident distracted from what was a terrific match and a terrific tournament. I think African football put its best foot forward over the last few weeks, and for it to end this way, and this is what we're talking about today, is unfortunate. Keep in mind, Senegal plays the United States in a friendly May 31st in Charlotte. They then opened the World Cup against France. You might recall in 2002, Senegal beat France in their opening match en route to reaching the quarterfinals. A lot of people think they could go on a similar run this summer, so it would be a shame if players got suspended or something happened stemming from this incident that would derail their World Cup chances. And then Morocco are fascinating as well because they've been riding this wave of momentum, semifinalists at the last World Cup, bronze medal at the Olympics, won the U20 World Cup. They were fully expecting to win this Africa Cup of Nations on home soil and then get a further boost going into the World Cup. Instead, people are talking about the manager stepping down, about Brahim Diaz being banished from the squad because he tried that Panenka. So you wonder where their head's at, which is of particular interest to me because Morocco's opening match is against Brazil at MetLife Stadium.
You mentioned the Panenka, Mosse. I was not amazed because it kind of always happens when there is a missed Panenka, is that, you know, the crushing criticism is expected, and it is crushing. But this notion that it's a bad penalty. All right, a bad penalty is the penalty that doesn't go in. We all know that it's 80% of the time it goes in the back of the net, and the advantage is totally to the kicker. But we also know statistically that the goalkeeper moves one way or the other. So going down the middle isn't necessarily problematic. As a matter of fact, you could probably make a case that it is advantageous to do that, and you are playing the odds when you go down the middle. But if and when it's that one moment when the goalkeeper doesn't move, or in this case slightly moves and is able to recover, yeah, you don't look good. But I don't look at it in terms of Diaz as that was a bad penalty, other than the fact that it didn't go in. And so if he had missed it by hitting it wide or hitting it someplace where the goalkeeper saved it, that's a good penalty. And I know it takes massive you-know-what to actually do it in that moment, because there is an element of edge and, yes, risk, even though the numbers don't necessarily bear that out. But I just think that I think it's simple to simply say, oh, that's a bad penalty, and how could he possibly do it? I mean, I've heard people say this is the worst penalty that they've ever seen. No, and if it goes in, you're sitting there with the smoke and a coffee just hanging out. But in this case, it didn't go in, and with all the extra hoopla, and by the way, he had to wait, 15 minutes in order to take this? Not an excuse, but that just shows you the crazy amount of drama that was going on there.
Now, there are conspiracy theorists who think he missed on purpose, that part of the deal to get the Senegal players back on the field was that he would agree to miss the penalty. If he did that, then never mind Leonardo DiCaprio or Timothée Chalamet. You can give him the Oscar for Best Actor because he looked crushed afterwards. And he put out a message on social media today apologizing for the penalties. So if this was all arranged, I don't know, I feel like he wouldn't have been able to hide it as well.
He also went out of his way and out of his mind to make sure that penalty was called. I mean, on the field, he was adamant that this was a penalty. And, and the penalty calls or the calling back or the lack of VAR, all that kind of went into what was going on. And that's why Senegal felt aggrieved and felt like throughout the game that it was, them against not just Morocco, a very good team, but them against the referees and them against the crowd and them against the soccer gods. And then when, the goal was called back, although the referee, if indeed the whistle went before the ball went in the goal, there's nothing in that moment that they can do it. But a lot of people will argue, okay, but you got to equal it out, and then a soft penalty down at the other end, that's that's a problem. But it's a game that we're talking about. It's a tournament now that we're talking about. And unfortunately, like I said, when these things happen, it's a reflection. When we had problems with the FIFA Club World Cup, when we had problems with Copa America, when we had problems at times with Gold Cup or whatever, it's always going to be a reflection on, the Confederation, but in this case, where it's happening, and whether you like it or not, that's what's going to happen in these types of situations. And as I mentioned before, there's plenty to complain about and plenty unique aspects of a CONCACAF affair. And, we kind of at times wear it on our sleeve because from the outside, people will say, well, how can you possibly let all that happen? And a lot of times we'll shrug our shoulders and say, hey, This is CONCACAF. This is what it is. As frustrating as it may be internally, or as frustrating as or confusing as it may be from the outside, this is how we roll. And so if you want to change it, you have to change it within your region, within your confederation. But yeah, again, it's just not a good look, but we wanted to start the show off with it because that's what everybody is talking about right now. And so whether it involves the U.S. or not, and in this case, you can certainly make a case that because we're talking about two teams that are going to be here this summer and many more that played in the tournament that are going to be here this summer, it's absolutely, I think, appropriate for us to start that. And it's fun. It's fun to talk about what's going on. So let us know what you think. Did you think it was a penalty? Did you think it should have the goal should have counted? Did you think that Senegal should have forfeited the game when they left the field, as you said, Ian Dark felt, or anything else and everything in between when it comes to what's going on there? I would think from a Morocco standpoint, I don't know if it puts more pressure this summer, but it certainly lights another fire for this Morocco team that mesmerized us last World Cup, and that, like I said, that a lot of people have high hopes for here, but they just couldn't get it across. And if it was all kind of geared for Morocco to win, why didn't they?
All right, so let's transition to the club game. It was another eventful weekend across Europe. We'll begin with the English Championship. Norwich City claimed the 2-1 away win over Wrexham. Josh Sargent not involved. You might recall he refused to play in their previous match against Walsall in the FA Cup, and he's been punished by being forced to train with the under-21 Norwich team. He wasn't selected for this match. He hasn't traveled for their upcoming match against West Brom, so the situation has gotten very ugly. Sargent hoping to get a move to Toronto FC.
I mean, has it gotten ugly? I mean, first off, Josh Sargent, you have no one to blame but yourself. This was wholly manufactured by your actions when it came to this type of transfer. And we talked before, last week about how, this is a big move, and this would be his biggest move, both in terms of the money involved, but also in terms of a massive change in life for him. But that's no excuse. You still gotta do your job. And the sending to train with the second team, this has long been a reaction that clubs have had, and it's a shaming. It's a scarlet letter that is put on players and said, you're not even worthy of training now with the first team. And you know what? Sometimes you just have to go through that gauntlet to get to the other side, or in this case, to get to what you want, which is obviously a move. And I don't think Josh Sargent's, the Josh Sargent as a player, or his personality is, or it's going to be impugned. Right? I mean, I think he's going to be fine going on. He's in a long list of players that have had to deal with this, because this is what coaches and this is what front offices will do to a player that is forcing their hand, that in this case certainly has leverage, but is forcing their hand. They have to be seen as strong, and they have to worry about how the other players are going to see. And they want to make sure that they're not being forced. But you know what? You're always going to be forced if and when there is a deal on the table here, and it sounds like there is. I was never in a situation where, I was forced to train with the second team, and that's the proverbial doghouse, right? We've all been in the doghouse at a certain point with a coach in a sport, and sometimes they will do things to shame you in front of the group. Sometimes they will do things to make their position look better in front of the group. And it's always about the relationship to the rest of the players that we know if and when Josh Sargent gets his move, you still got another, however many players there that you have to deal with. And you're in a fight here when it comes to what's going on. So I don't think it's a problem either way. But again, Josh Sargent, you're old enough and your agent should be experienced enough to know that if and when you press that button, this is what's going to happen, and more often than not, it does.
Yeah, here at the State of the Union pod, if you act up, the punishment is you have to go work on the Joel Klatt pod.
That's training with the youth team or the second team? Okay.
Two Americans did shine in the championship this past week. I'm going to lump these two together. Haji Wright got a late winner for Coventry in their 2-1 victory over Leicester, and Patrick Agyemang got a late winner for Derby County in their 1-0 away victory over Preston North End. So here you have Sargent creating this mess and not playing, while two strikers who are above him in the U.S. depth chart are playing and scoring in the same league.
Yeah, this is interesting. I don't know if we've talked about it, but I don't know if I've gotten your take in terms of, first off, how many strikers do you think that Mauricio Pochettino is going to take to the World Cup next summer?
3, and I would take Balogun, Pepi, and Haji Wright. I think those are the 3 best.
I think I agree with you. I mean, I do think that Agyemang endeared himself last summer, but there was an element of immaturity that I think even he and Mauricio Pochettino would acknowledge. And it seems like, he has grown. He is obviously scoring goals. That's a good thing, obviously. But I just don't think that he pips a Haji Wright, who certainly has experience and is scoring goals. And so it might just be a timing thing and obviously a numbers thing when it comes to Patrick Agyemang. But again, the little part of me that says, that summer, I think it was formative. I'm talking about last summer with the Gold Cup. I think that was formative, and I think it was proof of concept, if you will, for Mauricio Pochettino that he's going to do things his way. And so, if for example, Agyemang was that third striker over even a Haji Wright, I think a lot of people's minds would be blown and a lot of people would be surprised and or angry. But I don't think it should be as surprising as on the surface it would be when you say something like that.
Now, on the topic of American strikers in England, according to Fabrizio Romano, Fulham have not given up on signing Ricardo Pepi despite having that €30 million offer turned down recently by PSV. Other Premier League clubs are interested as well. So it sounds like that forearm injury that's going to keep Pepi out a couple of months has not dissuaded teams from trying to acquire him in this January window.
This might be one of those desperation buys sometimes people get their business done ahead of time and they have all their ducks in the row, and then as we know, as it gets closer and closer to the end, and either from a public standpoint you want to at least appear like you're doing something, or from a practical standpoint you need to do something in order to give yourselves the best chance of whatever you're doing, whether you're staying up or whether you're trying to get into Europe or whatever it ends up being you're doing. Listen, I'm not above Ricardo Pepi being involved in a desperation moment for a team, if that's how he ultimately gets a move that we all know is going to be something that helps him beyond the World Cup. And who knows? I mean, if he does great things in the World Cup, or this just goes back and forth and back and forth. To your point, I don't think the injury, I think everybody's kicked the tires and recognized that it's not good to have, but he's going to be okay and come out of it the other side. And so he's still the same player, whether he broke his arm or not. And whether they ultimately pull the trigger on something before the end of the January window or not, that's gonna be interesting. Again, a lot of these players with that World Cup looming, if you do well at the World Cup, whatever that deal is now and whatever bird in hand you have now, it obviously grows exponentially if and when you're starring at the World Cup. But again, we just talked about it. Ricardo Pepi, even if he's on the roster, maybe he's the first sub off the bench for a Balogun and stuff like that. But if you're not starting, then again, that weighing of the risk reward of continuing on and playing through the World Cup and hoping to have a World Cup when you're healthy and you're on the field.
2 Americans went head-to-head in the Premier League this past weekend. Leeds United claimed the 1-0 home win over Fulham. Jedi Robinson went all 90 minutes for Fulham. Brendan Aronson played most of the game for Leeds and got a nice ovation when he subbed off after another strong performance.
I think Brendan Aronson, obviously, and you mentioned the ovation, and I think he has won people over, and not just with the goals, but I think there is a greater appreciation for a consistency that he has brought into his game, because I think there's always been an appreciation for the fact that he, quote unquote, works hard. All right, that's great, and certainly maybe more so than any country or culture, your work ethic and the fact that you work hard is something that is, well, literally applauded at times. But I think he's combined it with a consistency and a working smart part of his game that has elevated him in the eyes of certainly the fans there, but he ultimately hopes in the eyes of Pochettino, and that whatever he was over the last couple of years, that has improved and therefore made him that much more of an asset to Pochettino come next summer when that roster is announced.
Another rough weekend for Crystal Palace. They suffered a 2-1 defeat away to Sunderland. Palace now winless in their last 10 in all competitions. Oliver Glasner did not make a single substitution in this match, and then afterwards ripped the owners for abandoning the squad. He's very unhappy they sold their defender Mark Gahey to Manchester City. Glasner has announced he's going to leave at the end of the season, but a lot of people are speculating it might happen sooner than that. So Chris Richards finds himself suddenly in a tumultuous situation there.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Chris Richards because I think he's built up enough cachet. But there is a major league, the film Major League, when vibe that you're getting right now, and they're just stripping the car for parts at this point. I think Glasner is not going to be there, but I think one of the valuable parts is Chris Richards. And so maybe if he plays his cards right, either he is a part that is stripped for a much better car, or he becomes the part that they cannot afford to be stripped, or they cannot afford to let be stripped going forward. But again, if Chris Richards is healthy, he is a starter for the national team this summer. And if he is starting for the national team and plays well, then his value goes way up. And so then you're faced with, okay, well, is it a situation where now his value is at an all-time high, so now we're going to sell him, but again, that's a stripped part. Or his value is so high that we're going to pay him even more money because we cannot afford to let anything else go. It's story as old as time, my friend.
And Glasner, until very recently, was a hot manager getting linked to the likes of Manchester United. I wonder what this recent tumult at Palace is going to do to his stock.